I'm Ryan Conley. I'm a filmmaker and host of the 12-year running filmmaking show called Film Ryan. During those 12 years, I've released 16 short films of varying sizes and complexity, from the $300 in favors to the $100,000 in favors, and everything in between. So in this session, I want to talk you through, from start to finish, the things I find most important when making a short film. And we have a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time, so let's jump right into it. Of course, to get started, you need an idea. What is the story you are going to tell, and why do you want to tell it? And here's the thing about that why. It doesn't have to be to change the world, to convey some incredibly deep and affecting message. It's amazing if it does, but you may just want to thrill an audience, give them an experience, the gift of escapism. And I think we can easily fall into the trap of thinking that the only real film is the art house film. And that's just not true. I adore art house films, but films that seek only to entertain you and give you the gift of mental relief for that period of time are just as valuable. So if that's you, don't be discouraged. Tell the story that excites you. But where do those ideas come from? It's tough to really lock that down. I do think you can plant seeds to try and help with that. Watching things, listening to things, music, books, podcasts, news, people talking in public. Be curious about everything, analyze everything, and then eventually your what if will pop into your head. But then there's the route of resources. A few of my films were formed from what I had available to me at the time. Proximity is a great example of that. I had 300-acre plot of land that I could use and a few people that could be in it, a prop builder friend of mine that could make sci-fi looking props, and $300. With those ingredients already there, we started to form what that thing could be. And this is an excellent route when you have very limited resources like I did. So with limited budget, keep your resources in mind to form your concept and story around that. This sets you up for as much success as possible. Now, writing is something that we're not going to get incredibly deep into. That really could and should be its own session entirely, but there are three things I want you to keep in mind when you're starting your script. The first thing is something I always say: don't go with your first idea. And I'm not talking about the concept, we already decided on that. What I'm talking about are the events inside your story. Often, your first thought will also be your audience's first thought. So keep that in mind while you're writing. Going in the opposite direction could be a great way to surprise your audience. For an example, let's look at my first public short film, Tell, which admittedly is riddled with issues, but this moment illustrates my point. Originally, when writing the script, I had a scare moment when the lead went up into the attic, but I realized that this first idea was what my audience would be expecting. So instead, I used it as a way to fill that tension balloon up, giving no release. He then leaves, falls off the ladder, which I use as a misdirect to land on the actual scare moment when I finally pop that tension balloon. And this takes me to another point: setups and payoffs. In this moment, I take the time to set up what causes our lead to slip off the ladder. It's a simple example, but that makes it a solid example, since you should be setting up everything in your film that has some kind of a payoff. One can't exist effectively without the other. So while heading up, we see that blood hit here, and it's doing multiple things. We have a tone build with it, we're pushing the idea of what he may find up in the attic, and setting up for what's to come. And that idea of setups and payoffs will come back again later on, so I'll just leave it there for now. But for me, this is one of the biggest things to keep in mind. Anything of importance in your film should be both set up and paid off. And finally, let character and theme guide everything in your story. You may have the theme up front, I sometimes do, but sometimes I find the theme while I'm developing. Then I'm able to go back and get everything to follow that thematic North Star. But once you have that thematic core, what it's really about under the story surface, it will help you make every decision going forward. Possibly the biggest make it or break it aspect of your film is the cast, which is also the hardest thing to find. There are good places online you can go to find good cast, and when you do put together the sides, which are the selections of the script that you will have the talent read to audition, select 2 or more that show range. It's easy to get distracted by the yelling or the overly emotional moments and think you found the right person, but for me, I find that the most important stuff are those subtleties, so make sure that you get a scope of performance to look at. But depending on your experience level, your only option may just be friends or family, which is exactly where I started too. do. If that is the case, then just like budget and resources, you're going to want to write your script with that in mind. Lean into your limitations. It should go without saying that you should know your story forward and backward better than anyone. With your script finished, go through and make notes on every moment, every line of dialogue, all with the goal of truly knowing the whys of every moment in your film. Why does the character react that way? Why do they say that line of dialogue? Why is the specific prop used right there? Why does this scene exist? So beyond knowing what happens, you need to know the why for every single line as well. And of course, as I build this out, every shot, every piece of wardrobe, every piece of prop, everything is leaning into the whys that I discovered while doing my detailed notes. And those whys are really character and theme. Everything melting into that. So if I'm moving the camera, there's an emotionally connected reason why I decided to do that. This is the director's rehearsal, and the work you do here is an excellent tool for getting your cast and crew on the same page during production. So now that we're in production, and as a director, likely the first thing that you're going to do is take that plan, the shot list, the boards, the film you already cut in your head, take it, roll it up into a nice little ball, and throw it away. On every film that I've ever made, I've had to throw out at least 60% of my original plan at the very least, especially on the low budget end. You don't have much time or control over your location, things change, weather shifts on you, and you don't have enough time to get the thing that you thought you did. And in those moments, you're going to need to be able to shift on a dime. But the upside is you did have that plan that you built on top of the whys of it all. So you can adjust and make decisions that still support the end result of that why. And that is why prep is so important, not because you will stick to the plan exactly, but because you build it all on top of emotional and thoughtful foundations that will support the story as you make changes. And this helps you when talking to the actors as well. Let's take my short film, There Comes a Knocking, for an example. She's in this room drinking wine because this is something that they would do together to unwind, but now she's doing it alone. She's wrapping herself in one of his favorite sweaters and listening to the last message that he left her on repeat, holding on to him however she can. And this house is darkly lit. She hasn't bothered to turn on any lights, leaning into the idea that he was that light. And although she's trying to keep a sense of him, he's still gone. All of this reinforces the pain that she's feeling and holding on to with the loss of her husband. So those whys make the decision for what the character is doing, what the character is wearing, and what the scene even looks like. And will the audience read into all of those things? Probably not, but some will. But even for the ones who don't, it still gives you layers and tools to construct something meaningful and hopefully honest. And again, allows you to throw out your plan with confidence. That new plan that we're talking about is all about scene construction, shot selection, coverage, and blocking. And let's start with shot selection. And what makes up a specific shot is your size, angle, framing, movement, and focal length. For shot size, you have all the variation from extreme wide all the way to extreme close-up, with the obvious effect being less or more intimate or connected with the subject in question. From being distant, held back from the subject, to inside of their thoughts. The eyes are the window to the soul, as they say, so the closer you are, the more connected your audience is. And you can use this to push more empathy or make your audience more uncomfortable. Then for angle, you have everything from the wide to low angle. Thematically, people often choose this to either make a subject feel weaker in the case of a high angle or more powerful in the case of a low angle. It doesn't always mean that, of course. It depends on what context you're using these moments in and their severity, but the idea is to play with natural perception. Are you looking down or up at someone? As children, we look up at those in power. As adults, we look down at the children we have authority over. For framing, this really encompasses everything within your image, but I want to use this to point out a few important choices. Is your image clean or dirty? Meaning, is there an element between the lens and your subject in the case of overs or over-the-shoulder shots, or OTS as you would see on a shot list? Thematically, putting something between your subject and the audience can keep them at arm's length. You could use this visual element of having something blocking your subject slightly in every shot to visually push the idea that they're hiding something, they aren't trustworthy. Or conversely, you could make them a visual open book, showing that they are trustworthy. But let's move on to blocking. Blocking is a choreography of movement or lack thereof in the scene, both with the actors and the camera, and it's a dance between those two elements. And when blocking movement, there's three main things you want to think about: motivation, parallax, and counter motion. Parallax, we already talked about. Things closer to the camera move faster than things further, so the more depth you have, the more interesting whatever the move will be. Then counter movement, which is exactly what it sounds like, movement within the frame that are countering each other for more visual interest. And as with all things cinematic movement, Spielberg is the master of counter movement, so definitely check out his films with that in mind. But for me, the most important is motivation. Is your move motivated or not? Either one can work, but in many instances, you do need the movement of your camera to be motivated to move your audience through your story. So let's look at a few moments from my short Ballistic. With this move here, where she grabs the gun and holsters it, we needed her to commit to the action first before we could follow it. It would have been incredibly odd for us to pan down to the gun for no reason and then she does her action. With that, we would have been disconnected. Instead of in the moment discovering it with her, we would have been ahead of her in God mode. Again, I'm thinking of this as if we were physically in the space with her in that moment, wondering what she was going to do next. I wouldn't turn my attention to the gun until she moved for it. Then it would grab my attention and curiosity. For a physically unmotivated move, we have this dolly in. And while physically unmotivated, I would argue that it's emotionally motivated, and I used it to intentionally land the joke. The bad guys are speeding in, she has a weapon, it's go time, she aims it, we move in for her big action moment, and then the gun is empty. Without that move in, we wouldn't have had the impact for that punchline. Coverage is really how we will construct our scene visually. It's the collection of all those elements to cover the action of the scene. Again, from as simple as a dialogue scene with basic triangle coverage, which would be a master and two overs or singles, or as complex as a big action sequence. And for this, let's look at something more complex like this action sequence here. For this action beat, there's a lot going on, a lot of choreography, but from a coverage standpoint, it's essentially triangle coverage. We have this angle, this one, and this one. Given this section of the hall is sort of a T, it really gave me no other option. So as we look from a top-down view, we see the setups here, here, and here. Then it was just a matter of following the action and two specials. For the specials, these are shots outside of that main three, which is her turnaround here, and then the guard missing, and we land on her here. And this is how I approach most scenes from a foundational standpoint. My performers choreograph this great fight, then we start rehearsing with me in the mix, since the camera is always just another character within a scene. Then I can plan the coverage I need with the basic concept of triangle coverage as the backbone to make sure that we have everything that we're gonna need in post. With that locked in, I can then add additional elements to make that moment more immersive and emotional. Now granted, this scene doesn't have a lot of specials. What's happening in front of the lens is complex enough, so the camera's job was just to follow that. All of course with motivated movement like we talked about before. And really tight motivated movement inside of an action scene will really enhance the excitement of the moment, since it puts the audience right in the middle of it, lets them participate, like this moment right here. In this shot, we have one of our baddies swinging in, she catches the attack as the other baddie stands into frame, and we use this swing of the nightstick to bring us around to the other side, catching the kick block, and we end on this final kick. Or we can use movement to reveal like this right here. She gets kicked back, and our following her reveals the third baddie back on his feet coming for another strike. This is the blocking that we talked about for action, the dance between the performers in front of the lens and the one behind it. And at first, when you look at a complicated action sequence, though admittedly this one's a little more simplistic, which is why I chose to illustrate with it, when you're first deciding how to shoot this thing, it can feel overwhelming. Where do you put the camera and when? But once you have the initial blocking of the talent, it all starts to reveal itself, like this move right here that allows us to take a pause from the action for just a moment, reset, and we're into a whole new thing. It's just her and him now, and then we explode into the act 3 of that fight. And yes, I said act 3, not act 3 of the entire film or story, but of that moment. I think of every scene within a film as its own little story. Each story needs to fit into the overall narrative, of course, but each has its own reason for existing as well. And if it doesn't, that means you can cut it. And saying 3 acts is the same same as saying beginning, middle, and end. If we stay with this simple fight scene here, our Act 1 is the setup. She's on the run, then cornered, no choice now, she has to commit to the moment and fight, which takes us into our Act 2, the bulk of the fight, the fun and games. Then we dial everything down for this moment here with the hit before exploding into our Act 3, the final confrontation and climax of this scene. So what you really want to think about is, why does this scene exist? What is its setup, conflict, and reaction? And how do I cover that to get across my intention to the audience? Another thing that has become massively helpful to me in production is editing while we shoot. I've been lucky enough on my 2 latest shorts to have an editor cutting while we film. This lets me catch small issues that we can solve easily enough with an insert, or bigger issues that we really need to know on the day. Of course, the faster the system, the better, so it isn't slowing you down. I've always been on NVIDIA systems for everything I do, and we have a very fast Dell Precision 7750 with the NVIDIA Quadro RTX 5000 that we use for general Film Riot episodes as well. But being able to check in before leaving location really is crucial for a director. Admittedly, this is a tricky one. It very much depends on the type of actor you're working with. What's their process, their personality, their comfort level? So for working with actors, the most important thing that you can possibly do is get to know them. Talk about the material, what it means to them, all the whys that you spent so much time locking into your mind. Let them into that vision and hear theirs. You've hired that person to take something that's just letters on paper and breathe life into it with their specific sensibilities. So they will absolutely have ideas and thoughts. Hopefully that you never did, and as with everything else as a director, we're keeping an open mind to hear every idea, looking for things that will continue to make the film better as we create it. The major benefit of this, of course, is that you and your cast are on the same page before you ever get on set. So once you are there, it's just a matter of helping them when they need it. With this emotional moment with Stephanie Butler, thanks to a very long and emotional conversation that we had, we were able to have this trust and shorthand. I was able to just sit quietly with her and remind her of some things. And of course, talk about what this moment meant, that this was one of her favorite times of day to sit with the man that she loved, drink good wine, and have good conversation. But now she's alone, with nothing left but this message. Then you talk about what the character may be thinking or struggling with, like how they bought this house to have more room for kids, to grow their family, hear them running around, playing upstairs. But now that will never happen. The only sound she has is this digital recording about a door and some food. Another thing I like to do now and then, which I've stolen from a ton of really great directors, is to play music whenever possible. So while we're prepping, while I'm talking to her, we have this piece of music playing that elicits the right emotion. Music is a really powerful tool that can say a lot without ever saying a word. Of course, there's plenty of straightforward technical work to be done. Hit this mark, look here at this time, and so on. But for me, everything boils down to mutual respect, trust, and openness to ideas. If you have that, you'll be okay. Then there is possibly the most important job of a director, showing kindness and respect to every single person on set and making sure that everyone else does the same, from the PA all the way up to the producer. Everyone is instrumental in getting the film made, and everyone there is as valuable and worthy of your thanks. So to put it simply, don't be a jerk. The best set is the one that allows the cast and crew to become family, where everyone feels heard and valued. Do that and you're gonna have something special. And if someone is behaving badly, it's your job to pull them aside and correct that. The director and the producers are the rudder. As you go, so will the entire ship. If you're editing your own footage, the first thing that you want to do, which will save you a lot of frustration and will set you up to get the best cut quickly, is watch every second of footage that you have and organize it. Create bins, label everything, make notes, whatever you need. I'm not going to get into anything technical. Vashi did an amazing talk last year on editing, so go and find that. It's much better than anything that I would say. But there are basics to keep in mind as a director, things that matter whether you're the one with the hands on the controls or not, like pacing. And pacing is easily the thing that people get wrong more often than not. And I'm talking about everyone. No one gets a great first cut. It's always rough and paced incorrectly, just like a script. But the main issues that you see up front is sluggish pacing. The scene drags, the shots hold too long. The best medicine for this is to cut until it's too fast, then start letting air back in. And show friends that you trust. Just watching it with someone else will let you feel what's not working. But we have our coverage here. Where do we use it? Again, we go right back to our foundation, the whys, to guide us here. We're choosing when to go to a close-up for that emotional impact, or to focus the audience in on a bit of information. Sometimes it can be instinctual, but it's often an intellectual choice based off the whys and your experience. Again, I haven't edited my last few shorts, but I do make sure I always have a laptop with me when cutting with my editor. Something from NVIDIA so I know it's crazy fast, like that Dell I mentioned earlier. With a mobile desktop level setup like this, I've been able to cut the trailer and do some VFX shots while we work on the film. It's been a really great workflow with my editor, Lucas Harger. With transitions, I'm not talking about a crossfade versus a wipe. I'm talking about how you transition from one scene to another, one moment to the other, one emotion to another. And the edit is very powerful for this, but you want to have this in mind from square one. How you move your audience from one scene to another should be right there in the script. Otherwise, you'll end up panicking in the edit and resulting to a fade to black, which 9 times out of 10 just feels like you're cutting to commercial. Once again, let's look at this scene from There Comes a Knocking. This is a good example because we have 2 different methods of transition here. To get into the scene, we are cutting to an establishing shot that shifts us in time. Then we cut into a close on the glass, which then we use to back up to our lead. So those elements are both giving us information, but is also smoothly moving us into a new time and location in that same house. However, to leave this scene, I didn't want a smooth transition. I wanted something that slammed you into the next moment, telling you that we've made our tonal shift in this film. We're jumping genre from drama to horror. So here I use music as our transitional element. The music rises and then sucks away on the cut. But it's the sound that really makes this work and feel intentional. Of course, we've all seen more elaborate visual transitions. Edgar Wright is a master of that. But again, sound can do a lot for you too. And of course, you can manufacture good transitions in the edit. Editing can solve a lot of problems, especially with sound, but you really want to think about this before time so you can accomplish the best version of it in the edit. In every edit I do, I am always creating temp sound design as I go. If I'm also the sound designer, like I was for some of our action shorts, then those end up making their way all the way through, but I never cut without working sound in along the way. The reason for this is because sound is massively important to your film. There are times that an edit can feel completely wrong, but it's not the cut, it's the sound that is making it feel that way. So doing temps helps guide you through and find what is working or not, especially when it comes to showing roughs. I never show a rough without sound work. A lot of friends will send me roughs to give notes on, and my first note always ends up starting with, I don't know if it's the scene or the lack of sound, but even if it's a rough temp, it'll go a long way in conveying the end result. And I treat music the same way. I'll add a temp score to my edits, but temp love is a real thing, and I have been guilty of it for sure. So I make sure that when I'm ready to move to the original score, I take all the music off my edit and start watching it without any. This washes my brain of that temp, so I'm not clouded when my composer sends versions. I don't want to go too in depth with visual effects here either. I just want to point out a few simple effects that I use on almost every project, things that anyone can do to boost the end result, like combining takes. You see Fincher do this all the time, and it's something I've done on at least half of my films. If you have a shot that's locked down, you can mask out areas to adjust pacing. If one actor took too long to respond, you can shrink time by separating those 2 clips, make a mask, then adjust the time of one, and there you go. Another simple one, depending on the shot, is object removal. It used to be much more difficult, but with Adobe's content-aware fill, it's become impressively easy on most shots. More often than not, I'm using this to remove something subtle, a cup that shouldn't have been in the shot, a fly, and so on, little distracting elements. Then sky replacement. A great example is this shot from one of my action scenes. This one shot had the sky totally blown out and just nasty looking. It's a short shot, but that sort of look really takes the value down a lot. It feels horribly amateur, and it most often is a very easy fix. There's plenty of tutorials, including on our own channel, of how to do this, so I won't go into it here, but keep this in mind. Even a subtle sky ad on a shot like this from one of our Film Right episodes does a lot to improve that shot. And finally, we have a really fun one, and that is limb extension. Obviously, when you're shooting an action scene, people aren't actually hitting each other, well, most of the time, and because of that, you will inevitably have some moments that clearly don't land, and this is a crazy easy fix. I'll take this shot for instance, we'll take this in After Effects, find the moment the fish should be connecting, duplicate the footage, mask around the arm, move it to connect, do a little blending, and there we go, done. Since it's only one frame, it's insanely fast and simple to do. Now, of course, if it's too far away, that'll be tough, but I've only come across that issue maybe twice. So we have the film, we finished it, all of our beautiful intention oozing of all the whys that we've done, locked, ready to go. So now what? This is the most difficult question of all, and one I beat my head against the wall for years ahead of my show Film Riot and even after. Having an audience with Film Riot is nice, it means people will watch it, but if you're making short films, you probably want to make feature films or series, which means the right person needs to see it. For that, the only answer I have is to live by the motto, the worst they can say is no. Once you have your film, make sure you have promotional art, behind the scenes images and videos, a website to send people if possible, but package it all up in the best, most professional way possible. Make sure it's easy for whoever wants to get in and look around. Then do the work of making a list of every blog, short film site, YouTube channel that may want to post it like Alter or Omeletto or Short of the Week. Do your research and find who you would need to contact from those places. Then draft custom, personal, humble, and respectful emails to each one. Not expecting anything, not feeling entitled of their time or response, just hopeful. In this email that you'll send, be extremely concise, give them a link to the film and promotional material, and let them know you'd love for them to check it out. It's a shot in the dark, and on some of my projects, I got no response at all. For Ballistic, I sent to about 50 and got 2 responses. But thanks to just one of those, the right people saw my short, which led to me getting managers and pitching to studios for the last few years. Of course, there are festivals and all the rest, so put together a plan that makes the most sense for you. If it doesn't work, try again. But that's it, the factors I find most important every time I make a short film. Hopefully you learned something or were reminded of something you already knew. Refreshers are just as important sometimes, but thanks again for hanging out and enjoy the rest of Adobe Max.